So one of the challenging things about thinking about the future, especially in a field like agriculture, is to resist the temptation to just look at what's in front of us, to, the immediate near term, and instead to challenge ourselves to take a wider lens, to perhaps look for those things hidden in plain sight. I'd like to share a couple of stories with you that illustrate that it's far more important how we think about the future than what we currently think about the future. So January 27 this year, a company called NVIDIA that was, well, probably still is considered one of the darlings of the artificial intelligence revolution, lost $1 trillion in a single day of trading. Now, I think everybody agrees that sounds like a big number. It is in fact a record in all of corporate trading history. And the funny thing is that it wasn't that NVIDIA had done anything wrong. There was no big scandal. In fact, their estimates their earnings had handily beat the street's estimates. What actually happened was that the market had decided or started to question their assumptions about what was really going to be required to dominate the artificial intelligence field. So it's not really a story about NVIDIA per se, about a single company or their stock price, but a story about what the market thought was required, that the reigning narrative was that we needed more GPUs, that we needed to build these massive data centers, and therefore the company that was supplying the picks and shovels, so to speak, was the one that was going to continue to dominate. But then along comes a company called DeepSeek, and somehow they posted these numbers that, were very impressive but used far fewer computational resources, and all of a sudden the market shifted, and in a single day wiped $1 trillion off the value of the stock, simply because all of a sudden their assumption about what it was going to take to win the AI race shifted, and NVIDIA ended up suffering significantly as a result. Meanwhile, while this was taking place, a different set of circumstances were unfolding in a very different way, in fact, deep in the floors of our oceans. Between November 2024 and January 25, several of the undersea cables were damaged. Now, this undersea infrastructure carries 97% of the world's internet traffic, and these particular incidents weren't random. In fact, they're almost certainly part of a coordinated attack by third-party actors, let's say, on this infrastructure. And surprisingly, it didn't even make the news. Hardly anybody knew about this, even though the commercial consequences could have been far more significant. Now, here's a number that should challenge your assumptions. There are 22 ships in the entire world capable of fixing these undersea cables. So the entire infrastructure that runs the whole digital economy of the world, there are 22 ships capable of fixing these. And so when more than one of those cables gets damaged, all of a sudden we expose this incredible vulnerability. So it's a perfect example of where we focus our attention on one thing, being the cables, and completely neglect something else, being our ability to repair the cables, and therefore bake in an extreme vulnerability into a system. So when we think about agriculture, we have to be careful not to oversimplify complex systems. When we think about water management, when we think about biosecurity risks, we want to try and avoid oversimplification and ask ourselves how we can further understand the complexity of the systems and not open ourselves up to these kind of vulnerabilities. So welcome to this very exciting session today, where we're going to look into that a little further. I'm Matthew Pryor, and together with Sarah Nolet, we are the co-founders of the Tenacious Ventures Group.
And at Tenacious Ventures, our mission is to unlock impact at scale in agri-food systems. And that word systems is really important, because if we fail to embrace complexity, if we fail to look for nuances, we might end up losing $1 trillion or maybe a bit less money, but in trouble for oversimplifying things, for not thinking differently about the future. And one way we do that is with stories. As humans, we've done that forever, whether that's cave paintings about hunts, or whether that's pitch decks or board packs about growth curves. We tell stories about the future. And sometimes that can be problematic. We can get trapped in stories that we might be too attached to. And that's why we often need to widen the lens. We need to think beyond how this dot connects to that dot and see the broader system. In the NVIDIA example, that was about not just chip demand, but looking at the underlying assumptions around AI infrastructure. And in the case of the cables, it was looking beyond the cables themselves to the repair infrastructure and the ecosystem in which they operate. And in agriculture, there are other ways we can widen the lens. Maybe that's beyond yield improvements to profitability. Maybe that's beyond productivity to whole of system resilience. Maybe that's beyond agriculture at all to the forces impacting our other sectors, related sectors, and coming into agriculture to change what the future might look like. Now, one tool that we use at Tenacious and with our investee companies and our clients is called a pre-mortem. You've probably heard of a post-mortem. If something goes wrong, and you look backwards and say, well, what did we get wrong? How might we have changed that? Well, this tool is a pre-mortem where you actually develop a scenario of the future and feel into it. Really think about what it would be like to be in that scenario. What are all the things that could go wrong? What are the decisions and the human dynamics playing out that you'd have to navigate? And by doing that, you actually can identify hidden vulnerabilities. You can identify interrelational dynamics that you might need to tackle, capabilities that you don't have. And we did this, or a version of this, last year with AgriFutures Australia. We wrote a report called Navigating a Future of Cross-Sectoral Forces. And we scanned and worked with stakeholders across the industry and found 10 forces that are impacting inside and outside of agriculture that could have a big impact on the future and that we weren't currently looking at today. And then we developed narratives for scenarios about that future, different futures, impacting different industries, with real stakeholders having to make real decisions. And it wasn't just a report. In fact, we've brought it to life here for you today. And so on stage, the team will be taking one of those scenarios and building it out, putting real participants up on stage to make real decisions about this future. So you'll see this whole scenario planning and futures thinking exercise live. Now, Bryce is facilitating. We've got a great panel, and so it's going to be a bit dramatic. We'll see if we get some people answering tough questions. We'll see if there's some drama. That'll be great. Hopefully it's really entertaining. But it's not just about the entertainment. I really invite you to think about this as a tool to think about the future, to imagine what capabilities you or your organization does or doesn't have, to think about the forces impacting your sector that you may or may not be ready for. Because as Matthew said, it's not really about what's happening in the future. It's not about getting it right. It's learning how to think about it. And as leaders, we can all be more prepared and more adaptable. So with that, I hope you enjoy the session.
So now, let's welcome to the stage the incredible panel ready to join our hypothetical. First up, we've got Margot Andre, the CEO of Pork Australia Limited. Next, we've got David Harris, the CEO and Managing Director of the Australian Agricultural Company, joined by Grant Statton, the Executive Director of Agribusiness Connect and the CEO of Atlas, Tony Burnett, Director of Queensland Operations, Trade and Investment Queensland, Joe Granger, First Assistant Secretary, the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, David Jokinch, President of the National Farmers Federation, Dr. Raylene Ward, the Senior Academic at the University of Southern Queensland, and our facilitator and a familiar face at Evoca Ag, Bryce Ives. Thanks, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, you will remember this moment because today, you, our esteemed panel, stand at the helm of a company that has transformed Australian agriculture as we know it. We are 8 years into the future. FarmCorp is not just another agri-business, it is a symbol of the future. A company built on precision agriculture, AI-driven decision-making, and an unwavering commitment to sustainability. Some say that FarmCorp is the gold stamp representing how profit and purpose can go hand in hand. A company that has redefined how we feed nations, how we manage resources and navigate the demands of a changing climate. Dave Harris, sounds like a good organisation to be CEO of, right?
Let's hope. We'll see how the next hour goes.
They say that trust is everything, It's the currency that secures investors, the bond that holds partnerships together, the promise that sustains confidence, takes years to build trust, only a few seconds to break. How serious do you take trust as a CEO?
It's right at the top. I think without trust, no one listens to your stories, you don't find the people, you don't have a business, you don't have something to articulate. I think like trust is the spine of everything we do and the relationships we have with each other as people, and the business is an extension of that. So I can't think of too many things that I would have higher on the list than trust.
But the world is watching you. Investors track every move. Policymakers see you as a model for the entire industry. Competitors, they envy you. Some even fear you. So FarmCorp, ladies and gentlemen, it has power, it has influence, and it's on the rise. Margot Andre sounds like a wonderful organisation to be chair of 8 years in the future.
It sounds fantastic.
Now, when a company reaches this sort of level of dominance, its responsibilities extend beyond shareholders and profits. So as chair of FarmCorp, when you hear this, who does FarmCorp really truly serve in your eyes? Is it the investors, is it the shareholders, the Australian people, the planet itself?
Business 101, you would automatically say we have to make sure that our shareholders are being looked after, but the reality is we have to look after people, look after those who we're feeding.
Now, Grant, sustainability is not just a buzzword at FarmCorp, it is embedded in the DNA of everything that you do as a company. Chief Impact and Transformation Officer, 8 years from now, you're not just shaping the company's future, you are setting the benchmarks for an entire industry. And FarmCorp has been very big on the triple bottom line, how well it's doing. It's always out there beating the drum. Now, tell us about the triple bottom line, people, profit, planet. What does it mean for you?
Look, it's symbiosis. It's working together. For us, we're always striving to appease the chairman, but the chairman and the CEO set an amazing culture, and we look at the value of sustainability as a key beacon for our business across the globe, and we like to put our capital into certain pursuits that meet profitability and sustainability measures.
I do want to be clear, they don't know this scenario yet, but Grant did say he'd been doing some acting lessons. So if you looked confident then, you will understand why. And I hear congratulations are also in order, Grant. For the past 4 years, you've been leading one of the most ambitious partnerships in Australian agricultural history, a world first. An agreement with First Nations Australians, an agreement that is being named as one of the best in the history of corporate Australia. It's on the verge of being signed. Dr. Raylene Ward, you've been the knowledge broker in this. It's been a 4-year deal with the biggest player in Australian ag. Imagine what sort of work you've done to pull together all the mobs, all the community. What would you have done to do a deal like this? What would you have been doing in the background?
So, on behalf of all the traditional owners in this entire country, it's been my role to be that knowledge broker, to be able to lead some of those conversations, the consultations with community on country. It's been driven by people, not by me and not by the organisation. I've been there to keenly support the direction and where they want to head. So it's been very much a partnership that we haven't done before. It's historical, it's new, it's innovative.
Because as we stand here today, FarmCorp is about to face a storm unlike any before. So right now, at this very moment, an invisible force, I can see you taking notes, is already moving against you, a force that you cannot see, but one that can see everything about you. Decisions made in the coming days and weeks will define not only FarmCorp's future, but perhaps the future of Australian agriculture itself. And the question is, when the storm hits, will you hold steady or will you fall? Dave, are you a morning person?
Sorry, bro. I saw I missed that. I can't hear.
Are you a morning person?
Am I a morning person? Yes.
You like a cup of coffee in the morning? What's your morning routine?
Typically, it involves more than a single cup, but yes.
You've had 2 cups of coffee,
Righto.
Sitting at your desk. You're scanning the overnight media reports. The global markets are steady. FarmCorp's name is in all the usual places, the industry blogs, the financial updates, and then your phone rings. Ava Morrison, your Chief Risk and Information Officer, never calls unless it's serious.
Yes.
Her voice is steady, but there's something beneath it, something she's trying to contain. David, we've been breached. Someone has been inside our data for months. When you hear those words, what would be the first thing that comes to mind?
I think the first part of all of this is how to stay calm in those situations, because the head will spin, right? And so I don't know about anyone else, but certainly I find most people think a lot better when they're calmer. So it's ask more information. So it's calm the person down on the end of the phone. How can we work through this? How do we get the right people in the room or the right conversations to start gathering the information? Because the gut sinking feeling will not go away until you start working your way through it.
Ava calls back. Her voice is even tighter. There's more. The hackers may have accessed Farm Corp's internal climate and sustainability risk data, documents that don't align with what we've reported publicly. So, David, you've led a crisis or two in your time. So in these first moments, before the headlines, before the panic, what should a CEO do?
So the first question was a lot easier than after I found out that they're not aligned very well. So this is where the rubber hits the road as it comes. So I think for me, it's I come back to the trust part that you talked about. It's actually about understanding what have we said, what is the difference here, and how are we going to play this out. Typically, running away from these things is not necessarily a fruitful exercise. So I will have probably been on the phone to the chair pretty quickly to work through those sorts of things and make sure that the right people are in this, because none of us are in it on our own. But definitely it's continuing on that understanding the detail piece, so we can actually come up with the quantum and have half a hope of articulating the truth and managing the information that you're saying is out there.
Well, you say you're going to ring Margot. Give her a call right now. What do you want to say to her?
It's another one of the situations. It's unfortunately these calls never happen just to say hi, and so we've got an issue, and we don't know what the breadth of it is at this point in time. But there does seem to be discrepancies from some information out in the public to what we know. We don't have the detail yet. I don't have the quantum, but I do need to flag that we've got a pretty serious issue here. So things like, I can't recall if you said at the start whether we were public or not.
You are publicly listed?
We're public, righto. So things like trading halts, all of those sorts of things need to come into the game pretty quickly.
Margot, what advice would you give your CEO?
Well, first of all, I hope I've done Pilates and I've had a couple of coffees before we get started, so I'm nice and calm and zen. My first response after listening to my fabulous CEO and understanding what's at risk was to go back to basic fundamentals of what did we do when we first found out, and that is to ensure that we bring the right people around that first initial group, bring them up to speed with what we know, keep everything calm, and get ready for what we might need to do to support the team and the people who are involved.
Your corporate affairs director walks in, a folder in hand, a single-page summary. So we need to control this before it spirals. If we say too much, we're going to create panic. Investors will start pulling out, Margot's phone will be ringing. So corporate affairs, legal recommend a measured response, a statement that says just enough, but not too much. Grant, you are on the executive team. What would you recommend to your CEO right now? What should he do?
I think we need a fact. So we need to start a key stakeholder engagement to understand exactly what's going on here. Is there a level of IT breach? Where's our data being accessed? Just so the facts are on the table before we instigate any sort of response. I think we need to put a team together. Team of capabilities beyond sustainability, IT, and perhaps we need to go into a little bit of a war room and think about how we respond collectively.
Okay, David, no pressure.
Yep.
But you'll be on every news outlet by nightfall if you get this wrong. The world won't just know about the breach, they'll know that Farm Corp is vulnerable. You pull the war room together, and guess what they tell you? They really don't know much about how much data has been taken, but someone has been in. So there could be something out there. Do you disclose? Do you not disclose? What do you do?
Look, I think at this point in time, you'd hope by the end of the day, we're at the end of the day, weren't we?
Yeah.
You've gone through and you've understood quantums, right? And so understanding both quantum of risk, damages to external parties, internal parties, people, the whole piece, reputational, financial, the whole piece. So you get a size of the quantum of it. But fundamentally, I think you have to manage it with truth, and saying that you don't know certain things is okay. And so these are the things we do know, these are the things we don't know, and this is what we're working on. But also these are the steps that we'll take to find our way through that. I don't think over-promising in that situation's what I would subscribe in any way, shape or form.
Okay, so you're going to go public with what you know at the moment.
Yeah, I think there's got to be a statement there for sure.
All right. Well, 24 hours later, Margot, the numbers hit your screen before 7 a.m. At first you think it's a glitch, then the messages start flooding in. So you're down 15% in the first hour. By noon, 30%. Hedge funds are circling. They smell blood right now. So investors are calling you directly and they're demanding answers. And reporters are digging. So the words corporate failure and farm corp are splashing around. So as you're watching the numbers fall, what's your instinct about this decision yesterday? Like, is it one that you'd back as chair? And what are you thinking now?
I would have backed my CEO on that. However, probably council would follow through to get those investors around a table very quickly, to give them the inside information to understand. And hopefully by this stage, if the information isn't correct, we understand why it's not correct, and we take ownership of that decision very early on. And it does come back to that, what did we do when we first found out? But I think in those situations, you would have your CEO, your chair and your executive team talking regularly and providing information out to your key investors, because otherwise they'll fill the air with rumours and innuendos and media reports. So you do have to be a little bit proactive, and we would probably revisit, I'm guessing, CEO, what statements we've actually put through from the executive to see how we could calm that situation, what's happening. There's two elements. There's the news cycle versus the actual investor cycle, and they need two different approaches of the news versus what you actually tell investors. But informed investors make informed decisions, and that's what you need to give them, that information.
And the two things are happening at once. Your phone rings. It's Fran Kelly from ABC Radio National. So Margot, the government and competitors are quietly saying that Farm Corp is too big to fail. So what do you say to that? Are you a company in crisis, or a liability the country can't afford to lose? You're off the record, but this narrative, too big to fail, how does it sit with you personally? Do you believe companies are too big to fail?
I don't. I believe all companies should be held to account, but I also don't believe there's a journalist off the record either. So I think any journalist who rings and says we're off the record, it's not true.
She's a beacon of honesty and integrity.
She's a beacon of honesty, but I'm never going to say that. Look, it does come back to that honesty of if there is something wrong, that we have done something wrong, hopefully by now we know and we own it and we work to improve it. And we focus on the core functions of the organisation. We're here to feed people, and how do we keep those supply chains open and keep people fed? But no company's too big to fail, and they should always be held to account. And FarmCorp is no different to that.
Your phone vibrates again, and you start to get pinged that there is a grainy video that is apparently circulating. No one has seen it yet, but there's a rumour of it. And an anonymous whistleblower in shadows. Their voice is altered, but their words cut like a knife. They knew all along, they knew these numbers were wrong. So Margot, suddenly there's a risk that there might be a social media play, a grainy video is circulating. Your CEO yesterday has made the move to be as truthful as you can right now. You've pulled your investor circle together. Who would be the first person you call when you get this information? Would you be talking to your CEO right now, or who would be the first person you get on the line?
It would be twofold. I would absolutely call the CEO, but I'd be calling the other board directors as well. I'm assuming I have other board directors. and keeping them involved and up to date and seeking advice and making sure we've got all the right information, and then working with our investors. Forewarned is forearmed.
I think we needed a bit of air conditioning in this theatre right now. The air is thick with urgency as the emergency begins. The emergency meeting in Canberra. A long table, stamped folders, the words confidential. A television screen is flickering in the background. There's some muted news coverage. Farm Corp hacked. National security at risk. So this isn't just about one company's failure. This is now potentially about food security, about trade stability, about Australia's sovereignty. Joe Granger, 8 years into the future, your first Assistant Secretary in the Department of Ag. I was told I couldn't make you Secretary in the Department of Ag because that would put your job on the line. Your team has spent years warning you that food security is a national security issue. And now this is happening. So no longer a policy debate, but we're watching a potential food security issue. When would the government likely become involved in what's happening in farm? When would you be having conversations in the department? What sort of conversations would you be having?
Food security is national security, but as this audience knows, even 8 years in the future with a challenge to climate, Australia is very food secure. So my key question is, the business is big, it's profitable. What has actually happened to the organisation? Is it a data breach? Is it a profitability breach? And is it going to actually impact their ability to deliver the food they're producing for our local food supply? So stepping back from, there'll be a lot of food hysteria or food security hysteria on talkback radio, but is that actually true? And trying to get to the source of that.
And as a senior bureaucrat, what sort of work are you doing? Are you recommending making contact with the company? Are you waiting for contact to be made? What does that look like?
Something like this, you'd kind of expect already that the company, it's so large, it probably would have already talked to the Minister's office and given them a heads up. It's obviously ASX listed, so it's been giving updates to the share market. We'd be watching that very closely in the public service. We'd be looking at it as an organisation. It's clearly a key stakeholder for us in terms of our portfolio. We probably have a range of senior people in the organisation who know a number of the key players and are probably having a conversation. So we're gathering as much data as we can to try and understand exactly what the issue is. You mentioned national security. We're probably getting some interest from a range of our colleagues in Canberra. We're probably talking to our colleagues at Prime Minister, at Cabinet, at Home Affairs, potentially Attorney General's Department, and maybe Treasury and Finance as well. You'd be talking to all of your different colleagues in town. And on a trade perspective, I guess our question is, what is the problem here? Is it really a reputational problem? Has a major flagship company for Australia been found to actually be telling porkies? Is the sustainability credentials that we've been selling and no doubt promoting strongly in government, where are we at with that relationship and whether or not there's any impact in terms of our trading relationships?
Tony Burnett, you are now a senior advisor to the Minister, advising on trade. Farm Corp hasn't contacted the government yet formally, but there's been some back channels. No request for assistance. The stock market is free-falling, billions in value lost. Rumours of foreign actors pulling the strings. So what are you thinking as an advisor to the Minister? What's the political cost of stepping in? What's the risk of doing nothing?
Oh, good one. Look, I think from our point of view, it's making contact with the board and the CEO. It's getting the facts on the table. Do they need help? Putting that olive branch out there. And just working out fact from fiction, really. Obviously, a large Australian company's a large Australian employer who are always voters. So we need to just make sure we're protecting our communities as well. Make sure the jobs are safe.
DJ, 2 elections from now, you're no longer the president of the National Farmers Federation. Some good luck, good timing, and the good people of the Mallee have elected you to Parliament. These days, you are serving as the Minister for Agriculture. I won't say which political party, because of course the NFF is party agnostic, And right now, your Chief of Staff is pacing the room. They want to know, what's your initial gut reaction as you're watching all of this unfold? What are you thinking about Farm Corp?
How much has the price dropped again?
It's gone. The shares dropped 30% in one day, probably going further.
I'll probably tell my Albanian friend just to hold off on purchasing yet. Jokes. So obviously the agricultural portfolio and the fact that this is one of the centerpieces of our industry is crucial for us to maintain our status globally in trading. So I will obviously would have been briefed by the department already because they're all over it, and would have let me know that they know nothing. And then I would have turned to my Chief of Staff and said the most important thing that any minister would ask his Chief of Staff is, how many points are we up in that seat, and how relevant is that seat to our political party? And knowing that because we won the last by-election in a landslide, and we have got some seats up our sleeve, it's still important that we continue agriculture to progress forward. And because Farm Corp is one of our largest political sponsors, who are also good friends of mine who took me to a lot of really good functions like the Grand Prix, the tennis, and might have gone to the odd cricket game with Margot, we have each other's phone numbers, so I'll probably give her a direct phone call.
Well, that is wonderful, isn't it? Because there is a phone here right now. And Margot is on the other end. I mean, what kind of conversation would you be having with her, in all seriousness?
G'day, Margot. What the bloody hell's going on over there?
Oh, Minister, I hope you enjoyed that rugby union game we went to the other night.
Well,
it wasn't the cricket.
The other team wasn't getting as flogged as what you are at the moment. So can you just tell us the truth? Are you up the poop or not?
So, Minister, thanks so much for the call. Lovely to chat. Look, the reality is food security is fine. We can continue. It's just someone playing, a bit of a data breach and trying to tell a few furfies. We can continue to feed Australians. We are going to be on the front foot. We'll get the message out. We'll look after our shareholders and should be right.
Well, the word in the street's completely opposite to that. In fact, I hear that everything's knackered and the supply chain's falling apart. We're within 2 days of starving the country. And to be honest, it's just not good enough. You better come up with answers by the end of the day or we're putting a full inquiry and locking you down.
Minister, you have our full commitment to look after this, but may I remind you that we will continue to feed people, but perhaps some government funding coming our way to help us actually ensure those supply chains stay open will help us. No, seriously, Minister, we've got this. Our commitment is to feed the country, to ensure our supply chains remain open, and I can assure you our business is still on full steam. We just need to make sure we take care of this little data breach.
And that's okay if I leak that to the media that you've said that?
Food security is our main priority, Minister. We remain committed to feeding Australians and those globally.
Now, DJ, you've had a couple of political advisors listening in. Tony, you were standing next to the Minister. How freaked out of 10 were you just then as you were hearing some of that conversation?
My biggest concern is, has that email of those photos been deleted yet?
Would you say to the Minister, too aggressive? Right now he's also being, mentioning he'll put it into an inquiry straight away. What would you suggest as an advisor?
Well, there's got to be a white paper for sure.
Oh, yeah, correct.
If not, a full inquest.
So, DJ, there's also that risk that if you tread carefully,
that escalated
you could be too
quickly.
careful. You could go too far right now. In all seriousness, would you be pushing straight away to put them out in public like that?
Well, for starters, just because you asked everyone else, I like my coffee strong enough to show up in a drug test. But the reality is, when you've got a situation like this, you have to get the department on side and you do have to start talking to the key players, because there's two things here. Obviously, it's serious enough to have such an impact on a share price. So there is obviously something red flags, and you're quite right, there'll be a trading halt or something of significance that would signal to the financial institutions that there's something going on here. The role of the minister is probably to do two things. It's support and navigate a way through this issue, but then also making sure that we're telling enough information to our major markets that we've got either the situation status, so that truth part, and always in these situations, you're quite right, it's about being straight enough to say what you do know and what you don't know, but also ensure that you've got a process to say, we'll update you in a timely manner. And that has to be tomorrow, the next day, we'll give you the next piece of information that we have, because this not only affects our nation and the profitability and viability of ag, it has ramifications internationally as well.
And Margot, the jokes aside about the rugby tickets, the relationship and the personal relationship, that ability to be able to pick up the phone, that ability to have, again, trust, like how important is that in your work, and what kind of relationship would you have been trying to build with the Minister as a chair?
I think it's at all levels. It's not just the ministerial level, it's at the department level, it's at your shareholders, it's at people across your retailers, your supply chains, your transporters, everything. If you cannot pick up the phone and give them a heads up on situations coming, then you're probably on the back foot before you even start. And those relationships would be at all levels. So your CEO, your chair, your head of sustainability, all of those sorts of things need to be forewarned. So the relationships cannot be discounted. They are incredibly important, and you need to be able to pick up the phone before the crisis. Because we have to remember, it's not a crisis of food supply chain. It's a crisis of a potential data breach around something you may have claimed or not claimed. Taking ownership of the breach and actually explaining to the general public and your shareholders what the actual issue is. If you let the rumours go, let the media potentially get the wrong story, you can lose it all in an instant. So you've got to bring it back to what do you know, what are the facts, and what do you want the message to be out to people?
Well, that's good to remind us. There's been a cyber attack 2 weeks ago. FarmCorp's data has been breached. As it's playing out, we have found out that the data that FarmCorp has been talking about in terms of sustainability and its commitments were in fact entirely wrong. But not only that, the data breach could have other ramifications in terms of food security. What's at stake? Well, a people, planet, profit, purpose, a triple bottom line, and an agreement with First Nations traditional owners, one that has been navigated and negotiated over 4 years. So much of the information was wrong. So much of what was said was not actually true. But not only that, FarmCorp is appearing every day in the newspaper. How many people would be calling your phone right now? What would they be saying?
I'd probably have every traditional owner group visiting me in Canberra or visiting me somewhere where the organisation is. It's making sure that I have those respectful relationships with traditional owners to be able to talk plainly and simply in their words about what is actually going on with this company. What does it mean for First Nations people around culture, traditional knowledge, intellectual property, ethics? What does that look like protocol-wise? We need to take all of that into consideration. So it's not just about, the organisation and what are the values and principles around that, but also what the Minister has to say. But it's about how do we support communities, people, places and country, to be able to continue to have good relationships and move forward.
But personally, you must feel a bit deflated as you're watching all of this, and you've probably seen all this happen before, a little bit of history repeating, right?
Yep. It is a common conversation occurrence that we, continually hear and face, not just in this organisation, but in different communities, regions throughout the country. So it's about making sure that we truly listen and make things better for the future. We're here to be able to unite and be able to make sure that we're all being respected culturally and respectfully as people, but also where do we support each other to have a united front?
And Jo, you're looking at this and watching this play out in the department, what would the department be worried about and what would you be weighing up? I'm thinking markets closing to our products because they don't perhaps trust our sustainability info. What do we do if, say, markets start rejecting Australian produce?
Well, if this is a failure of the product stewardship and the sustainability potential market access requirements, that definitely is a problem for us. And so we will see that potentially it's just FarmCorp's products that are now no longer going overseas, but if we see that bleed into other Australian production, and so I guess it goes to what is the certification that FarmCorp has been using to put its products on the market. Is it a national certification program, an industry-led program? How can we be demonstrating that actually it's one business as opposed to all product from Australia? How do we lean into the conversations we're having with key trading partners? And how are we advising the Minister about some options in terms of what are the consequences for this business? Because it's really potentially let the community down. It's let its First Nations stakeholders down. It's let the community down in terms of its claims. And so government may be thinking about what might be the consequences for that and what kind of assurance does government want to put towards broader Australian agriculture, in particular the 70% of production that's going overseas.
2 weeks later, it's the Christmas party. The Minister is doing his annual karaoke song. DJ?
Islands in the stream.
Apparently we just needed a microphone for you, but I do love that, and we've got a special spotlight for you as well. Now, 2 weeks later, a grainy video floods the internet. It's finally there, and on the video, this is what's said. They knew. They knew the costs of compliance would cripple the company. They knew the regulatory requirements would lead to mass layoffs. They knew that accelerated climate reporting would make them vulnerable, and that's why they didn't tell the public. They've been playing a game all along. They've played the game. This is FarmCorp. And within minutes, Dave Harris, your phone is buzzing uncontrollably. It's bad news because today is your quarterly investor call. And you and Margot are going to be preparing for that call very soon. Margot, as you are having a huddle with your CEO, what would you be thinking about the future of FarmCorp and its leadership structure? Would now be the time to perhaps make a shift of leadership? This is not good news. It's not been playing out well. Or should it be as steady as she goes? Are you in it together right now? What would you be doing? This video is not a good look, but particularly the implication they knew. They knew all along.
So I think probably the first conversation we would be having is what did we know and is it true? I mean, we live in a world where unfortunately there's a lot of videos, a lot of information that goes around. So I guess hand on heart, we would need to know if that was true before any decisions are made. As chair, though, my CEO has my full support, and as long as he's open and transparent, we would face that shareholder meeting together. But I do come back to what do we know, what are we going to do about it, and how are we going to make sure that if it is true, that we actually rectify the problems. Put hand on heart, this is what it's going to be doing, here's our priority, and what was the failing, why did we do what we do? And that's a conversation with the government. If it was, as they say, we couldn't meet the compliance, I'm guessing we wouldn't be the only organisation in that situation. But you don't throw anyone under the bus if they didn't know. But first of all, find out if it's true. That would be my advice.
Dr. Ward, you're going to be there on the investor call. You've actually got shares as well in FarmCorp.
Wonderful.
So you could ask a question of the FarmCorp leadership. Mm-hmm. You could be cheeky. You could play the game a little bit. What kind of question would you think about asking the chairperson or the CEO?
Well, I'd certainly, be in the same room, introduce myself, ask what is the total amount of shares, that is held by either traditional owners collectively or individual groups. I imagine, because we've engaged all TOs in the country, I imagine each of our TAs will have a certain portion of those shares. You know, being investors, I would ask them, what does that look like? Can they report some, figures and how that is tracking? Is it going up and down? Something that I can give back to the people in those communities who are shareholders.
Because you're looking for confidence right now. You want to.
Yep.
But also the triple bottom line still matters to you.
That's right. Yeah, I want to be able to be reassured and confident that our shares are safe and secure for the future.
Grant, you've built Farm Corp's sustainability vision. You've stood on stages like this around the world, you've made commitments. You told the world that Farm Corp was leading a revolution in ethical, climate-smart agriculture, and now you've seen this leaked data. It doesn't just expose failures, it exposes deceit. And at this very moment, Dr. Ward is now calling you. You've been negotiating this agreement, this world first. What would you say to her one-on-one? You've got a personal relationship. Would you be standing by the company? Do you think it's time to admit all of the failures? Push for radical change? What would you be doing?
Yeah, Doctor, thanks for calling. I'm absolutely shocked as well. For me, in principle, I help set strategy, but the implementation and the goals of our products is supported by a team. From where I sit, I am responsible for that position in the market in relation to our sustainability, our environmental impact, and ideally our program around natural capital and First Nations and where we were going. I think for me, at this point in time, I need to talk to the CEO and come back around our public relations and what this means, because that was my responsibility. So I'd like to give you a call back, and at this point we are absolutely going to respond in the way that should be responded.
Oh, that felt like a very diplomatic call, didn't it?
Yes.
Do you believe it?
Well, I'm a bit uneasy. I'm not sure what you're going to come back to me with, but I'm really, really keen to hear what you have to say. But I'm also really keen to better understand what's happening to my shareholders' contribution and allocation of those shares, and is on your behalf, is that going to be good for us to keep, or should we sell?
Doctor, you have our assurances. We're too big to fail. We are a significant player in the food and agribusiness space, both domestically and globally, and we will transform this current position in the market around our brand and our public relations. So hold on to your shares. They're going to be a really good share. From where I sit, we all need to view our short-term incentives and just see what they look like. So I've got to have a meeting with the CEO.
I would say, Grant.
I look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah.
Look, it sounds very
Double down, buy more.
very sweet, doesn't it? But your credibility is not particularly great at the moment. No. You've been standing on stages like this. You've been telling people like this gathering how great Farm Corp is in terms of the sustainability credentials. This grainy video, the data that's coming out, the Australian newspapers just shown other data as well. It's not looking good for you. So after you've talked to Dr. Raylene Ward, you'd be talking to your CEO, and what would you be advocating for? Would you be thinking about changing Farm Corp's focus, not to worry about sustainability? Are you going to fall on your sword? Would you be trying to push the CEO a little bit? What would you be doing right now?
Look, this is a of magnitude issue for not only myself but also the CEO and the board. I mean, this is a major issue. I would take responsibility for the current position and the failure, because in the end of the day, the public space and our product alignment was really part of my strategy, which is complementary to the CEO and the board. So I would probably look to exit to assist the CEO and board reposition the market and be the first sacrificial lamb of the Farmco business.
First.
Yeah.
And do you accept that resignation?
Well, there's still a lot
Because
of
it feels like
information
a good get out of
missing here
jail
from
card,
me.
doesn't it?
Call me a detail guy, but there's a lot of information missing in this story. So I know we're a couple of months down the track, but
This is theatre and we can only work with what we've got, okay?
100%. So I would have asked a lot more questions. I would like to think that I had a lot more firmer position by a couple of months down the track. I'd be assessing how long I've had my head of sustainability in the role. I would by then be understanding how much influence did they have on this said situation and have a confidence interval on, is this actually real? How much of it's real? Who is actually responsible for it? You can't, if it's as big as it says, not one person can actually dictate this. Like, you can't actually, even that head of sustainability can't actually make this stuff happen without a lot of other people being playing a role in that, or complete systems failure. So I'll be honest, unless it's blatant, obvious, kind of old mate's been asleep at the wheel, I'm actually not taking the resignation right now. I'm keeping him in the tent, because divide and conquering when you're under the pump is not necessarily the place to be. So I would argue that whilst I may not have added the STI comment in his feedback to the investor or considering bonuses, no, I'd be actually keeping the tent, because this is where you actually need to understand things a little bit better. You need to bring people together as a team so that the business can work out of it. Like, standing there and shooting each other does not actually get you anywhere.
The room is quiet, but the weight of this moment is deafening. Margot, Dave, you're live in 2 minutes. The Farmcorp investor call begins. Usually, Margot, you give a bit of a rally and pep talk and then pass to your CEO. You've got your investors here today, all of them in this room. They're watching. They're waiting for certainty. So billions in value have been erased. Confidence in leadership at an all-time low. Rumours that the Australian government are meeting. A slightly gung-ho minister who's now got a karaoke microphone. Hedge funds are circling. This is a tremendous moment for the chair to rally the investors with some kind of confidence, some kind of clarity. How would you open this investor call?
Investors, thank you so much for joining us here today. I feel the pain you're going through. I understand the loss. I thank you for your commitment to the company over the last few months. We have investigated, we have worked through this. We understand the implications of what this means. The entire team, under the direction of our very capable CEO, have really investigated these issues. I need to reconfirm, it is not a food supply issue. Our people, our animals, our industries are well cared for through this turbulent time. We are here today to make a commitment to you that we are resetting the bar. We are going through it line by line with the CEO to work out all of the issues. And we ask for your time and your continued investment as we reset and we rebuild and we make sure this does not happen again. But we need to be clear, our commitment is to you as our investors to ensure we do not accept what has happened. We work through it, we make sure it doesn't happen again, and we will be revisiting every line of it, but we ask you to stay with us. I'd now like to hand over to my very capable CEO.
David, it's a defining moment of your career.
Oh, another one.
This is a key moment as well. Do you defend Farmcorp's mission? Do you admit even further to failures, or do you take some steps that none of us could imagine yet? Could you make a bold announcement at this point? Could you put something else into the mix?
Yeah, for sure. I think, look, at the end of the day, I'd be supporting the chairperson. I think it's owning up for the things that you do know. Again, it's compartmentalising the known and the unknown and breaking it through. I think there's a couple of things we haven't spoken to already, and that's actually taking care of the people within the business and the affected people as well. And so we'd be making sure that the shareholders understand that we've taken account for a lot of the risks and exposures beyond just the financial ones. I know we've talked about triple bottom line a couple of times, but if they're an investor in a business like ours, they're going to care about more than that financial piece. So it's take them back to the purpose of the business and take them back to the reason they invested and take them back to the reason we are all here and associated with this business, And I'm sure it was something about, making a better future or implementing new agricultural systems, or what was it, the dream that originally brought people to believe in this business and the concept behind this business. And I'd take them back to that and reaffirm with them that the purpose of this business and the vision of this business has not changed. There has been some bumps in the road and we've hit a few potholes, and we take full responsibility for that. But as we stand here today, these are the knowns, these are the unknowns, and this is what we're going to do to work our way out of it.
So one final question before you sign off, from a journalist who's covered Farm Corp for over a decade, someone who's seen it rise and is now watching this moment. Margot, David, if you were an investor right now, would you still put your money in Farm Corp? There's silence. The question hangs in the air. How do you answer, David?
For sure. I think you can look at it on a short term, and supposedly we're devalued by 50%, so it could be cheap. But if I'm in the business, if I believe the purpose and the vision of this business, I invest for sure.
Margot?
I would be asking our investors to remain committed with us while we acknowledge and work through what's happened. Stay true to us, and we'll work very hard to ensure we rebuild your confidence and trust in us. But we will remain committed to ensuring best practice governance is put in place so this never ever happens again, and we will work our hardest for our shareholders and our people.
The call ends and the markets react. Farm Corp's fate is now sealed, or so we think. So a classified report sits on the minister's desk, stamped in bold letters, eyes only, national security threat. Minister Asio doesn't knock on the Minister for Agriculture's door often, but today we understand the Farm Corp cyber attack was not random. It was deliberate. A foreign-backed competitor has been infiltrating Australian agriculture for months. They've been able to map supply chains. They've probed vulnerabilities. They've been waiting for the right moment to strike. This isn't just about one company anymore. It's not just about Farm Corp, but it's about who controls the information around Australia's food and food security. The Prime Minister is livid. He wants a recommendation by nightfall. And this is going to be a moment that defines your legacy as a minister. So, Tony, you've been in rooms like this before. We've got forces colliding. ASIO, the security agencies, they're clear. Agriculture must be classified as critical infrastructure right now. Strict government oversight. Greater cyber security, supply chain, exports. Just ramp up the oversight. But industry is pushing back. Major agribusinesses, the NFF, international investors do not want severe government intervention. How do you feel about that sort of regulation, that sort of really stepping in? It would ensure national security, but would it trigger some kind of backlash?
In short, yes. I think Australia's lived off an open economy. Government intervention is a lot less than other countries, and I think we want to continue that. We don't want to overstep the mark and put undue regulation into supply chains that we need to. So certainly some probably extra reporting mechanisms might be in place for some short period of time. We obviously need to have a good hard conversation with the country that is responsible for the breach and use some pretty good diplomacy skills. But I wouldn't be implementing too much more government oversight at the moment. Shareholders do a pretty good job of that.
Joe, this must be an incredibly frustrating moment for you because you've had members of your team who've been talking about this sort of threat for a long time. It's happening. It's no longer a policy debate, it's a live threat. And we've got those two forces at play. We've got those who are saying, lean in and regulate. We've got those who are saying, just let the market sort this out. But also, you've got members of your own team who are starting to put up positions as well. So what about the government buying out Farm Corp? Would that set a precedent that you could sit comfortably with? Would you recommend a buyout?
Well, Department of Agriculture doesn't buy companies without talking to a lot of other people in Canberra. So that kind of a conversation would be, with Prime Minister and Cabinet, with Finance, with Treasury, with Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, with Workplace Relations. When a government steps in and puts business on the contingent liability on the balance sheet, if it's making that decision today, when are you ever going to be able for government to sell it? So it's a very big decision for government to take. My question is, if we're moving from a cybersecurity, an additional level of regulation or control from government about cybersecurity, is it really necessary to go down and actually purchase the company? And would the government be any better at running the company than the company that's doing it right now? So I think in line with that sort of long-standing approach in Australian regulation and control is that we look for market leadership. What's happened in our regulatory framework that has enabled this failure to happen? Is it something in our financial regulation that we need to fix? Is it something that we need to add some additional oversight in terms of cybersecurity? It's a big leap for a government to start purchasing a company and then taking all the responsibility on when we're not well placed to run cattle stations ourselves. So I think I'd be strongly cautioning the Minister against such a thing, and he would need all of his colleagues' support to go down that road.
So very quickly then, what would you recommend the Minister do in this situation? ASIO is very serious about what this threat looks like. Foreign players, what would you say to the Minister?
I would suggest the Minister go to the Cabinet table, have a pretty deep conversation with his colleagues, and look at the facts. Where's the threats coming from? Are there other threats that are potential on the cusp? Is there potential short-term mechanisms that we can put in place to help stabilise the market, stabilise the supply chain, put our customers and trading partners at ease, or is there long-term mechanisms that we have to put in place?
Jo, what would you recommend?
I would concur with that advice. I think what is the framework, what is the support, what is the government role here to actually ensure that our trading partners can have trust and confidence, that we've got trust and confidence with Australian consumers. Government's also thinking about jobs. So those are the levels of questions government's thinking about, and the Minister would no doubt want to take a position on.
DJ, this is your decision. The weight of it is not just on Farm Corp, but it could be Australia's entire agricultural future. The country's waiting, the industry's watching. The Prime Minister is expecting a call. I can see at least two paths for you. One, you could declare agriculture a national security asset. You could put strict control in right now, strict regulation, or you could just leave it for the moment, no mandatory oversight. Agribusiness remains independent. But you're a smart guy, you might have a third option there as well. What would you do?
Well, obviously I would have rung Liam Nielsen from Taken as the dad and sent him over there to figure it out. But the reality is in these situations, it's trust but verify, measure twice, cut once. And government's not in the business of running business. Crikeys, we can't even fix holes in bloody roads. What are we going to do with the business? So we would never want to take over any business. What we would want to do is, we've obviously done a sweep through and made sure all of our processes are in place for any sustainability projects in any part of agriculture. We would have made sure that our back room would have been tidied up. We would have also funded an appropriate new agency that looks at how computers operate and all the people behind and be in front of those to ensure that our cybersecurity in the country, in the nations, becomes to a higher standard and not letting your grandma click the spam emails anymore. But more so, the reality is, the best thing the government can ever do is understand its role in setting the framework of allowing businesses to thrive. Australia is built on innovation. Australia is built on companies having enough rope to succeed, but they also need that yank part. I would definitely think that through our reporting process and through our understanding of the business, there would be some sort of penalty put into place through some corporate governance side of things. But when it comes to food and the state of Australia, I would be advocating for not a prescriptive solution on the food production. However, the systems behind verification of food, the systems behind ensuring that we can trust the descriptors that we use, once again, understanding that value of the product that we are selling is core to our future reputation as a nation, that is protected. And finally, what's the percentage of the seats that were ahead? We're just...
You made that up, my friend, so you have to remember that.
No, the reality is, whatever part of government is, you want them to be working with industry to come up with a solution. Government should never think that it's the smartest one in the room. It should take advice from both the good social policy that's provided by the department, and that's the oversight, but then also go to industry and go, okay, how do we ensure that this doesn't happen again? What penalties are appropriate? Not necessarily asking the industry what that is, but making sure that we've got appropriate penalties in place so that there is deterrence put in for future breaches or future events that are evolving, because we're not even sure how that affects our aspirations to include First Nations in becoming more active within agriculture. But finally, through all this, hopefully, even though a good spin doctor was in the market for a little while, to ensure that we are cutting through and telling the truth, because that'd be a refreshing thing to do.
I should say that Kathy McGowan is driving around your electorate. She's had a few meetings with independents, so you could be up next election as well. Who knows what happens? And very briefly, Dr. Ward, there's going to be a meeting of all of the key groups that have been involved. Do you think this would proceed? Do you think you'd end up going into the partnership that had been discussed, this world first, bringing First Nations knowledge, bringing all of that into the company, or do you think it would be completely off the table now?
I think it's certainly worth revisiting. We need to be clear about what are our rights and responsibilities, being very clear about what are the risks for us as traditional owners, but also Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander people representing our culture. We need to be very mindful that we are maintaining our integrity, we're being reciprocal in our processes, we are making sure that our culture and our heritage is maintained at all costs. We are very, very much making sure that we take the process very steady, and we're negotiating everything at a place and a rate of conversation with us.
Ladies and gentlemen, a company that once stood as a titan of an industry now is a symbol of some of its deepest vulnerabilities. A name once synonymous with progress, now whispered in boardrooms and debated in halls of power, no longer a success story, but a cautionary tale. History is rarely written in the grand gestures of kings and queens. It's written in the quiet moments of indecision, in the brief flickers of hesitation, in the whispered conversations behind closed doors. So what was FarmCorp? A beacon of agricultural revolution? A corporation too big to fail, yet too fragile to survive its own ambition? Or perhaps merely a mirror, reflecting the choices that we make when we're at the crossroads? A nation of unsure of what it values most. So was it profit or purpose? Sovereignty or security? Power or principle? Because these are not the questions of a single company, nor of a single moment. They are questions that stretch across generations, across landscapes of drought and plenty, across fields where hands once worked the soil, but where algorithms now dictate the harvest. The world is watching. They will judge this moment as they always do. And this was a reckoning. And now FarmCorp must live with the weight of its choices. The ink is drying, the story is written, but somewhere on the edges of the horizon, the next storm is already forming, and the question is, will we be ready? Thank you.